us an update on the current public education lawsuits against the state. Thank you for being here tonight, Ms. Hinojosa. Our third speaker, Mr. Alan Weeks, he's running a little late today, he'll be joining us in a little bit, is a former teacher and the current director of Austin Voices. He is also active with Save Texas Schools, an organization for educating the public and public officials about cuts to education. Tonight, Mr. Weeks will discuss strategies for getting the legislature to provide more funding. Thank you for being here, Mr. Weeks. Our fourth speaker, Mr. Timothy Giddens, is a student activist at UTSA, double majoring in Mexican American Studies and Political Science. Timothy is a founding member of SUSJ and has been studying the economic situation of the millennial generation. Tonight, he will discuss the state of our generation and our ability to access education. Thank you, Mr. Giddens. Our fifth speaker, Mr. Joshua Greene, is a science and special education teacher for Northside ISD and a longtime political activist. Mr. Greene is an advocate against austerity in relation to education and the social safety net. Tonight, Mr. Greene will discuss national student loan debt issues and solutions you can be involved in. Thank you, Mr. Greene. To get us started, I would like to invite Dr. Folks up to speak about the state legislature's cuts to public education.
Thank you very much, and I do appreciate the opportunity to be here and to speak. Where I received many invitations to speak, but when I'm asked to come speak to a group about school funding and problems that we've had in the last few years with the Texas legislature, I will take advantage of that opportunity about any time that I can. Because I am one that has been working, as she said, actually I will complete this year 42 years in education, 25 as a superintendent, and I've been involved in school funding issues for a long time, not only in the state of Texas, but in the state of Oklahoma. I've actually been a state superintendent of public instruction, which is equivalent of commissioner of education in the state of Oklahoma, and was actually involved in lawsuits dealing with school finance at that particular level. But the first thing, and probably the last thing I will say to you this evening, is that the state of Texas has totally failed in its mission to fund public education. In 2005, many school districts came together and filed a lawsuit against the state of Texas. And actually, at that particular time, we won that particular lawsuit, based primarily on the fact that the Supreme Court of the state of Texas ruled that the system that we had was unconstitutional based on the fact that it really involved a statewide property tax, which again is unconstitutional. So we won that case in 2005. The legislature convened in special session and basically wrote a new school funding law. And what they did in that funding law was they put every school district basically into the same amount of revenue that they had in 2005 and 2006, a figure called target revenue. School districts have been held at that particular figure ever since that particular time. The only way that school districts have been able to really generate new revenue is only if the state of Texas themselves, as far as appropriation by the legislature, decided that they were going to give more money to schools. Now, I want to make one point very clear here, and when you leave tonight, if you don't remember anything else that I said tonight, please remember this. Everybody wants to say, well, what about property taxes? I pay so much in property taxes to school districts. Why don't you get all of that particular amount of money? Well, the fact of the matter is, since they wrote the new law in 2006, school districts do get the money from property value increases. Everyone was real excited when Microsoft went in out here on 151 and said, oh, Dr. Folks, I know you're so thrilled, all this money you're going to get off of this Microsoft plan. Well, in reality, when they wrote the formula in 2006, what they said is that districts, you are going to get increases in property value, the taxes from that. Appraisal of your house goes up, whatever. So you write a check, it goes to the county assessor, they pay that money to the north side. But since 2006, for every increase that a school district has received in property tax, the state of Texas has taken an equivalent amount of money away. You understand what I'm saying? Which left every district at that figure that they were set in 2006, call that target revenue figure. Everybody got that? So there has been no increase in revenue to public schools. And people will say, Dr. Folks, look at all the construction out there, new businesses going in. Property value appraisals on homes go up. I live in Northside, the appraisal on my house went up. Do I pay more taxes to Northside? Yes, I do. But for every additional dime or dollar that I pay to Northside because of that property value increase, the state of Texas takes that money away. Who benefits from property value increases because of new appraisals or new construction in a school district? It is not the school district. It is the state of Texas. In 2007, we went to the legislature and basically said, actually 2009, and basically said, return that money to school districts. Over $2 billion had been collected by the state of Texas because of property value increases, and the legislature refused to return that money to school districts, which was in essence paid to school districts by property tax owners. We have become totally dependent on state appropriations. The only way a school district can get new revenue is to go beyond $1 in the amount of tax rate on the M&O, that's maintenance and operations side, increase taxes to $1.04, which we could, and then we could vote, go to our patrons and vote up to $1.17. Basically, every district in the state right now is at $1.04. There's a few below $1.04. But basically, every district's at $1.04. We are back in a situation where we have a statewide property tax. One other point I want to make is a couple of them. One is that when the legislature reduced the property tax from $1.50 to $1, you with me? Because that's where the tax was. They reduced it from $1.50 for $100 of property value to $1. When they did that, they passed a business margins tax to replace the money that school districts were going to receive. Because we were receiving money at $1.50, now we're getting it $1, that means we lose money. How are we going to replace that money? School districts, we're losing. They said, we'll pass this business margins tax, collect the money, and we'll use that to replace the money the school districts lost. Bottom line to that is they created a structural deficit. Because that tax, business margin tax, is only collected the money, and that's about half of what school districts need to really replace the amount of revenue that was cut when we dropped from $1.50 to $1. Every biennium, the margins tax is running about $3.5 billion short. So when the legislature came into session in 2011, it's not necessarily because of the economy that they had a shortfall in revenue. It's because of the structural deficit that they had created. Because of the shortfall in revenue that they created in 2006 up until 2011, the $3.5 billion that the margins tax was short basically came to about $10 billion that was short in the amount of money to fund education. But then you put the other things in there as far as the state revenue picture was concerned, and there was as much as a $27 billion shortfall that was talked about. So what they did, very simply, is they cut public education $4 billion in the foundation school program and another $1.4 billion in grants and special revenues. Therefore, every school district in this state has had to make reductions as far as their education funding is concerned. In Northside, last year we cut $61.4 million out of our budget, eliminated 973 positions, and that goes from teachers to support personnel, administrators, coaches, everyone. 973 positions we eliminated because of the cuts. My point very simply is, since 2006, school districts in the state of Texas has received no new revenue. We have built a budget in 2007, 2009, 2011 with the biennium, but even for next year, this year, when we're building our budget for next year, we're building a budget actually on less money than we had in 2006. Because of the budget cuts, Northside has approximately $250 less for weighted ADA, and I'm not going to get into technicalities, but $250 less per student than we had in 2006. At the same time, the state of Texas has come in and said, change the testing system. Go to the STAR, go to the end of course, which is a much more rigorous test, much more demanding. School districts are going to have to do all of the things that they've asked us to do at a time when they have cut $5.4 billion out of public education. The other thing I would say very simply is we have no equity in the system, and I know David will probably talk about that more than I will, but I will tell you, Northside is an average district in the state of Texas as far as funding. If Northside had the same funding as another district in Bexar County per student, we would have $22,000 more per classroom than what we have. That's how inequitable the funding system is. Northside ISD is larger than Austin ISD. We have more students than Austin. If I had the funding that Austin has on revenue per watt or per penny, I won't get into school finance. My point very simply is Northside would have $75 million more than it has right now. We have one of the most inequitable and inadequate systems of funding that any state in this nation has as far as public education is concerned. The system is broke. The only way that they could have really addressed additional money is the rainy day fund. They refused to use additional money from the rainy day fund. There was even a provision in the legislature that said any increase to the rainy day fund during the biennium, we'll send that to public schools. And there are people that voted, and that amendment went down because our governor and many of our state leaders did not want that particular provision to pass. Bottom line to it is the fight has to begin right now. Elections are coming up. We have to elect people to the legislature that are going to make education a priority. And I will tell you this very simply. If we don't fund the education of our children, we are failing as a country. Because I truly believe the public education system is there to educate all students. And that is what we do, and I think we do it fairly well. The system is broke, and I will finish with the same statement that I made in the very beginning. The state of Texas has totally failed in its mission to fund public education. Thank you very much.
I would like to offer the other panel members 2 minutes each to comment on Dr. Goldson's remarks.
I would like to say, as a teacher, we've seen the cuts. Dr. Folks can tell you, Northside didn't lay off any people, but they eliminated positions, and so we're feeling it with larger class sizes. And with the STAR test coming up, everybody at my school, and I'm sure all over Texas, is working harder than they worked last year, harder than they should have to work, but they're getting the job done. And we have to be careful. We can't let them say, we cut your funding and you still got the job done. It's taking its toll. Teachers are staying later. I know our academic dean is preparing for the STAR test next week, and she's at school till midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning. And so we can't let them say, we cut your funding and you still did it. We can't let that become the new norm.
Anybody else?
The only thing I would comment on would be that the effect of the lack of funding in the public education system K-12 directly affects higher education and the attainment levels that students could receive and the success that they could achieve. So basically, if there's less funding, there's less success for students in Texas and across the nation.
I'll just add that it is so very important that people who don't normally do this kind of work in the legislature to go and let your voices heard, because the other side of this will have the people saying, well, these are just superintendents testifying because they want more money. Teacher groups testifying because they want more money. Of course, you know, they do want more money because if you look at teacher pay in Texas, it's in the bottom 10 percentile. Yeah, bottom 10. They're 40th out of 50 states in the country. And, you know, they expect people from MALDEF to be there crying about equity. Heaven forbid they permit equity in funding for schools. But, you know, parents, concerned parents, you know, especially people from Northside, because like Dr. Folks told you, you know, everybody thinks, you know, Northside's a rich district, and I'm going to show you some data right now that they're a little better off than some of the Bexar County schools, but they're not quite as good as other Bexar County schools. And but people don't really understand that. They always think, oh, Northside's a rich district. Oh, Robin Hood's bad. You know, we have to give so much of our money back to the state, and that's not true. And now that the state's starting to reduce its funding even more, that's when the pain is really being hurt, and it's going to continue to be hurt unless you let your voices be heard.
Can I make one more comment? One thing that was mentioned was, and this was used constantly in the legislature, people get used to it. This is the new normal. Well, now, let me tell you what the new normal is. The new normal is no salary increase for teachers, less money for education, larger class sizes, you know, less money for higher education. That's what the new normal is. And I personally have told them point blank in front of committees. I said, I refuse to accept that this is the new normal. You need to step up and you need to find solutions to what we have to do as far as school funding is concerned. That's why we elect leaders. That's why we elect people to the legislature, is to find solutions, not just to go up there and say, I'm just going to worry about being reelected or elected to another office.
Next, let's get an update on the current lawsuits against the state from Mr. Hinojosa.
My name is David Hinojosa. I'm the Regional Counsel for MALDEF, the Mexican American Legal Defense and Educational Fund. And how many, by a show of hands, are familiar with MALDEF? We were born and bred here in San Antonio in 1968. We're a national civil rights organization. Well, we've been at the forefront of school finance litigation, especially in Texas, since the very beginning. We filed the first lawsuit in around 1984, and it was basically about equity. What's the difference in educational dollars at tax rates between the wealthiest and the poorest districts? And back then, the difference was well over $2,000. You had some districts taxing it 50 cents and still yielding $1,000 or $2,000 more than districts taxing at 90 cents. So there were huge gaps. And so we finally prevailed in 1989 when the Texas Supreme Court found it unconstitutional. And they held this here. This was part of their ruling. Children who live in poor districts and children who live in rich districts must be afforded a substantially equal opportunity to have access to educational dollars. Doesn't seem like rocket science, but when you see these words from a Texas Supreme Court, it speaks volumes. Unfortunately, as the court has changed over time, equity has kind of been watered down. And, you know, as late as 1995, when we brought Edgewood 4, the fourth lawsuit, there was a $600 gap between the wealthiest and the poorest districts. And it was actually larger, but they had this thing called the hold harmless clause. So the wealthiest districts, when they tried to equalize, bring the system more equalized, the wealthiest districts, of course, they have their lobbyists. There's very few of them, but they have their lobbyists up there, and they ask for a hold harmless. Don't make us go down, which isn't the right solution, right? We don't want to level down the system, but nevertheless, all the children have to reach the same standards. It's not socialism. It's just equal opportunity if you're trying to level out the opportunities that they have through the dollars. So, so they said that this hold harmless clause is in here, so we're not going to include it because that's only temporary. And fast forward to 2005, because we also brought a lawsuit. Ours was an equity lawsuit, an adequacy lawsuit, and we didn't win. So you had the poorest districts somehow in the state. We represented 22 property poor districts, and somehow we weren't funded adequately and equitably, but then there were some other districts, and I know Dr. Folks, Northside was part of the coalition that prevailed only on the tax claim. So the court held that it was adequate for everyone. A lot of our evidence was pushed forward in their case when they talked about low income and English language learner students and the achievement of those. That was a major part of our case. And the Supreme Court kind of just took that and put it over there in the tax claim. I'm not saying that there were politics involved, but that's the way it ended up being in reality if you look at it. And with this hold harmless piece, what was interesting was we showed without a doubt that the gap was about $1,000 between the wealthiest and poorest districts. But the court said, wait a second, you're saying that because in the late 90s or early 2000s, the hold harmless clause became permanent. So it was written in stone into the school finance code. And so when that's written into stone, now we're like, okay, well, it's game. Because the system's supposed to be equitable, you're supposed to take the whole system into account. And what they said was, no, wait a second. Yeah, you know, the gap's $1,000, but you're included that hold harmless clause. And when we did the same analysis in 1995, we didn't use that hold harmless clause. So we're not going to use it now. If that doesn't make any sense, it's good because you're following. If it does make sense, I'm sorry, but you know, there's something missing there because it's not logical. You know, to say, okay, well, in 1995, this piece of the hold harmless system is only temporary, so we're not going to consider it because it's going to be phased out. Now, all of a sudden, when it's permanent, they're not going to consider it just because they didn't consider it in 1995. It makes absolutely no sense. So, I want to go, this was supposed to be, just look at the far right side as far as the state is. This is what our state looks like. About 5 million students now. 50%, the majority of students in the state of Texas is now Latino. Only 31% Anglo, African Americans at 13%. Low income are now 60%. 3 out of 5 kids going to Texas public schools are low income. English language learners, you look around a classroom of 24, 1 out of every 4 of those students